Jimmy Carter was born on October 1st, 1924, in Plains, Georgia. His father, Earl Carter, was a hard-working peanut farmer and store owner. Jimmy's mother, Bessie Gordy, was a nurse who willingly treated black patients, breaking down racial barriers. Carter's Baptist family was deeply religious. Carter studied engineering in the Naval ROTC program at Georgia Tech. He was accepted into the Naval Academy at Annapolis to begin studies in the summer of 1943. While on summer leave, Carter met Rosalind Smith. They married in 1946, later to have 3 sons. After graduating in the top 10% of his class, Carter was assigned to work on submarines. Following the death of his father in 1953, Carter moved his family back to rural Georgia to care for his mother and childhood farm. During his time in Georgia, Carter got involved in local politics and was elected chairman of the Board of Ed in 1955. After serving in the Senate, Carter ran for governor in 1966, focusing on civil rights and racial reform. His liberal platform was rejected and finished the election in the distant third. The next year, Carter ran again, but altered his strategy to target rural white voters. His view on civil rights was so reversed that he was publicly called a racist, red-necked South Georgia peanut farmer. Nevertheless, his strategy worked. In 1970, Carter was elected governor of Georgia. Going against the racist policies that got him elected, Carter increased the number of black officials in the state by 25% and promoted desegregation. Always thinking ahead, Carter observed the national political events of the 1970s. After the Watergate scandal, Carter saw himself as a perfect candidate as an outsider of Nixon's party and a simple, honest man to regain trust with the American people. His slogan, "A Leader for Change," and platform of honesty with reduced government waste, won him the election against Gerald Ford in 1976, becoming the 39th President of the United States of America.
Jimmy Carter aspired to make government, as he said in his own words, competent and compassionate. He wanted to promote economic and social development, and he wished for the government to once again regain the trust of the people. He vowed never to tell a lie to the American public. He was, in fact, originally very responsive to the American people and their expectations, and he did have many notable achievements, but these were unfortunately outweighed and forgotten due to other problematic matters such as rising energy costs and mounting inflation. The citizens of America had very unreasonable hopes for his presidency, and it was impossible for his administration to meet those high expectations. Despite this, Carter worked hard to counter the economic struggles of America. These included inflation and unemployment, which he countered by employing an increase in nearly 8 million jobs and a decrease in budget deficit. In the end, though, his efforts proved futile, as his policies regarding inflation ended up leading to a short recession, destroying all the good that he had done in relation to the economy. Probably his biggest domestic achievement included establishing a national energy policy. There was somewhat of an energy crisis at the time of his presidency, and luckily, Jimmy Carter was up to the task. He first created the Emergency Natural Gas Act, and this authorized the national government to allocate interstate natural gas. He then formed the Department of Energy, and this regulated existing energy suppliers and funded research on new sources of energy, specifically sustainable, renewable, and ecologically sound sources. But he wasn't done yet. He then went on to create the Energy Security Act, which formed the U.S. Synthetic Fuels Corporation, which provided $20 billion to fund private industries, and this allowed for him to decontrol domestic petroleum prices to stimulate production. To top it all off, he was an expert in nuclear energy policy and pushed greatly toward the advancement of that technology.
In foreign affairs, President Carter sought to use moral principles as a guide for the nation's foreign policy. Consequently, Carter believed the U.S. should commit to promoting human rights. He cut off relations with countries that had violated human rights, such as Argentina and Brazil. Countries with good relations with the U.S. but had tortured and imprisoned its citizens, and created the Bureau of Human Rights in the State Department. Carter was heavily criticized for his efforts, however, since he was inconsistent. He still continued relations with Nicaragua, a dictatorship but anti-communist nation, and supported dictators in South Korea and the Philippines. Besides rights, Carter focused on strengthening international diplomacy. He was even awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 for his extraordinary efforts, although he was heavily criticized for many of his actions. In 1977, Carter obtained 2 treaties between the U.S. and Panama, which yielded the Panama Canal to Castana and improved U.S.-Latin American relations. In 1978, Carter would make peace between Egypt and Israel with the Camp David Accords, which forced Israel to relinquish the Sinai Peninsula and Egypt to formally recognize Israel as a nation. A year later, in 1979, Carter created SALT II with the Soviet Union, which limited the number of strategic missiles and nuclear missile launchers for both nations. However, when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in December, Carter canceled SALT II. In January of that same year, rebels will overthrow the Shah in Iran and take 52 Americans hostage from the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, causing the Iran hostage crisis. The Shah had escaped to the U.S., and the rebels bought the Shah in exchange for the hostages. After about a year's standoff, the captives were finally released in 1981.
Jimmy Carter's presidency can be characterized as overall ineffectual. Carter took office just 30 months after President Ford had left the entire federal government in a shambles. He faced epic challenges, such as the energy crisis, Soviet aggression, Iran, and above all, a deep mistrust of leadership by his citizens. To tackle this deep mistrust, he acted with honesty and candor. He led the people by setting an example. He pushed American people to reach a high morale plane. He vowed that he would never lie to the American people, and he acted very bold by pardoning the Vietnam-era draft registers, killing the funding for the B-1 bomber airplane, and pushing for a comprehensive consumer protection bill. However, when it came to actually solving the issues in the U.S., he had his ups and downs, and rarely had public support for his initiatives. In the economy, he created an increase in 8 million jobs, and he decreased the budget deficit. In foreign affairs, he created the Camp David Agreement, which brought peace between Egypt and Israel. In 1977, he also gave control of Panama Canal to Panama, beginning in the year 2000. He also recognized the Republic of China by revoking the 1955 Mutual Defense Treaty with the Republic of China. In addition, he also created the SALT II negotiations, which never actually happened as the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. In human rights, he denounced the Soviet Union and East European allies of human rights violations. He criticized South Korea for repressing democratic dissent, and he also refused to halt military supplies to Iran. In Iran, which some consider Carter's greatest folly, he was never truly able to solve the hostage crisis. The failure of his secret mission to save these hostages resulted in the hostages being scattered, making it even harder to solve the situation. In the environment, specifically the energy department, Carter made huge strides. He created the National Energy Program, he expanded the National Park System, he also created the Emergency Natural Gas Act, which authorized the national government to allocate interstate natural gas. He also created the Department of Energy, which regulated existing energy suppliers and funded research on new sources of energy, particularly sustainable and ecologically sound sources. He also created the Energy Security Act, which was the U.S. Synthetic Fuels Corporation. It provided $20 billion in joint ventures with private industry. Carter's downfall began with the Malaise speech, which is French word meaning illness. He blamed his problems on the American people. He had a lack of confidence in America's purpose and future. He admitted that people lacked confidence in his leadership, and he was never able to recover from this event. His refusal to engage in a give and take with Congress, his inability to use force effectively to resolve the crisis in Iran, and his inability to build coalitions and to be flexible in dealings with friends and foes, these very characteristics combined to brand him as an ineffectual president.